Hello, and welcome to the Cryptocurrency News channel. Today I'm going to talk about what I really think about XRP. Overall, I'm actually fairly bullish, just not crazy bullish like some of the army is. I think I just talked to Galgatron. He's like, yeah, I blocked that half of the people that were constantly like repeating XRP the standard or zero doubt or any of that stuff. I think he just like blocked all of them. I haven't, and that's probably why my feed's always choked up with like zero doubt, the standard, and all that stuff. But this particular graph is actually pretty indicative of what a lot of those people think, and there are thousands of them. You can see like XRP holder November 2018, and this was obviously written at the end of last year, almost a year ago. And you can see like the early adopters were supposed to be 2019 to 2020. This marks the transition into 2020, and it was supposed to be somewhere between $10 and $100 right now. Probably like looking at the graph, probably somewhere between like $50, $60 right now. Obviously that didn't happen because we're still at 25, 26 cents. But this graph for them has not changed for many of them. They just kind of moved the time period back another year or so, consistently moving goalposts based on how many of their prediction theories have actually failed. That's what the consensus is. But let's actually go back to the beginning when a lot of this stuff started, and that was early 2018, after this 2017 bull run, which basically every coin ran up at the end of 2017. What most people don't really know is that most of the gains for XRP were not made during November 2017 to January 2018. They were actually made back in March of 2017 or April of 2017, and XRP actually got the vast majority of its percentage gains. It actually went up by about 60x between March and April 2017 over the course of maybe a week or two at that time. But the same thing is like Ethereum, Litecoin, and all the bigger coins that actually existed back then also made large gains. So that was the first time, and that's where a lot of the ROI for XRP actually came from. A lot of people got really excited about some of the partnerships, and it probably pumped it up, but it was an overall really bullish altcoin time during early 2017 between Q1 and Q2. And XRP actually became one of the best, if not the best, percentage gainers back in 2017 because of April, March 2017, and not because of November, December 2017. Now, a lot of the coins that actually gained a lot more than XRP in November, December 2017 actually didn't exist in March, April, like Tron, Cardano, and a lot of the Tron, Cardano, IOTA, a lot of those that actually outgained XRP during the major bull run in late 2017 didn't exist, so they couldn't actually benefit off the first leg of the pump. Now, back in November, December 2017, yes, XRP did outgain Bitcoin, but so did everything else. So that's really not that much to brag about. It's cool if you sold off at the top and made a lot of money, but I think a lot of people got trapped and thought the market was going to go up forever and that their coin was special. And this doesn't directly just apply to XRP. It applies to every single coin out there. And everyone got wrecked once it actually slid back down because no one really wanted to sell for less gains. But the problem is, like, they didn't really look at the 2013 to 2017 bear market and see that the exact same thing was going to happen. If you really look at the percentage gains, XRP did about 16x. Nano did like something like 300x in the same time. Of course, it fell back to like 80 cents afterwards. Tron did 100x and then fell back afterwards. And Cardano did like 50x, and a lot of those coins spiked at the same time. So while the XRP army is gushing over those kind of gains, what they don't realize is during that time, you could have basically just picked a random coin out of the hat and done just as well. So that wasn't a special time for any specific coin, but it was a good time for all coins. And after that, it was a bad time for all coins. So there wasn't anything like special about that specific time. Same thing with like March, April 2017. If your coin was big and if your coin was one of the top coins and existed back at that time, you went up a lot. So the positive sentiment would carry throughout the entire market. XRP happened to be like a fairly unknown quantity during the beginning of 2017, so people were willing to FOMO into it a little more than other coins during March and April, and that's where it actually got its lead. But actually in November 2017 to January 2018, people were FOMOing into everything, and actually a lot of the smaller cap coins like Tron, Cardano, etc. actually outgained it. Now we arrive at early 2018, and this is where this whole bearable guy nonsense actually started. I thought for like the longest time that people were honestly trolling, because like for a couple of months I thought, you know, it was good nature, it was fun, because I thought people didn't actually believe in this like stuff or took any of this crap seriously. Because it was a cartoon bear like making this whole 589 projection, which from an economic point of view doesn't make sense. I mean, it takes exponentially more money to get XRP up to 589 than it did to $3. That's what people don't understand. It takes like over 100 times more money. And to get something up, you know, to actually pump it up to $3 or $4, it doesn't take like earth-shattering money. To get it up to 589 actually does. And economically, it just really wasn't feasible. And that's obviously why it didn't happen at the end of 2018. Plus, the market sentiment overall sucked. So that really wasn't going to happen. But after like a month or two of actually just playing around with it, you know, like commenting and stuff like that, I really began to realize that people actually took it seriously. Like, and at that time, I was like, seriously? People actually think this is going to happen? There's no way in hell this is going to happen. So, and then in my mind, I'm like, man, I had way too much faith in humanity, because if people had any kind of economic perspective, or they actually understood like any sort of economics, they would understand that this kind of transformation in that length of time was just not possible. Um, and also, you know, like the whole like $50 in one night flip switch thing that a lot of people actually got trapped on, because I actually debated with a lot of people that were like hell bent on that one day where it was going to $50. I knew that wasn't going to be possible in the flip of a switch. And also, you would have seen a lot of price rise leading up to that. And there was very little price rise in November comparatively to what it would need to be to get that $50 switch. And obviously, like the way it was explained to me, it didn't really make the whole theory honestly just didn't really make any sense with Temenos and all that other stuff. If you actually critically thought about it and didn't drink the Kool-Aid, you would have realized it didn't really make any sense at all. Interoperability, yes, it's there, but there's no way that they'll do that on one technical implementation where they just switch trillions of dollars on at once. That is basically an IT disaster waiting to happen, and that's not how any IT function is actually implemented. They always roll it out in very small steps over the course of a few years. And as we can see, when November 19th, 2018 hit, the whales basically just played people as chumps, because the price of XRP actually dipped about 20% a few hours before that was supposed to happen. The whales knew that people were going to actually float the price up pretty high, and they just dumped beforehand. So people basically just got played by a bunch of whales in November. And then after November, because of Binance announcing like XRP base pairs, which I didn't quite expect, it floated the price up for like another month or so. The Hopium for 589 end of the year, plus like some of the news like Binance actually did float XRP up for another month. But obviously, since 589 was going to fail at the end of the year, which it did hilariously, it was like 35 cents, the price of XRP in relation to Bitcoin started to drop. And that's why you have a lower price of XRP. XRP actually fell about 30%, while Bitcoin 3x this year. And that's why, and that's why altcoins haven't done as good as Bitcoin either, because altcoins got way, way too overpriced in the 2018 bull run. And that's for every single altcoin. And people didn't realize that, including myself early on. And they didn't really buy into Bitcoin in time. Now, a couple of months ago, I actually started just telling people to buy Bitcoin, because I finally realized after a couple of months that the financial institutions, or the FIs, they were investing in Bitcoin futures, and not anything else. That was very apparent to me after Fidelity opened up a BTC only trading desk, and Bakkt said they were only doing BTC futures. And I've read a lot of the news looking at countries that are even in remittance countries like Venezuela, Argentina, they were for the majority part using Bitcoin. And now we just got an article with Cuba on the same thing. So regardless of what you think they're supposed to use, or what's the fastest or whatever, in reality, in real utilization, they're using Bitcoin for now, and I don't think that's going to change for a couple of years. I think when countries really first start using cryptocurrency, it's going to be Bitcoin. And yes, the transactions per second is a problem, but they actually do have things like SegWit that can probably 2 to 3x times the transactions. And from what I hear, Bitcoin has around $150 million worth of transactional non-speculative value per day. At first, I didn't really believe that, but after listening to BitPay, seeing that like 10,000 people in Cuba were actually using Bitcoin to buy goods, and then hearing of a lot of other countries where people actually use like 95% Bitcoin to do stuff, I can actually believe that right now. So that's why I think Bitcoin is honestly, yes, there is the whole tether printing issue, obviously, but I actually do think that's why Bitcoin has actually risen more, because the FI institutional investment interest is in Bitcoin, and because people are actually utilizing Bitcoin a lot more than the other coins, regardless of the technical merits of those other coins. So, of course, at every moment, like, at every step along the way, when I shouted, no, it's not really going to get to 589 by the end of the year because that just doesn't make any sense. Obviously, a bunch of like hopium addicts um, always tried to shout me down whenever I said one of these crazy moon theories wasn't going to happen, and obviously none of them have happened. Now, thankfully, many people have actually started to see that this is all a joke, and was at best really poor trolling. But a lot of people still continue to believe in this because of the hope and because of the hopium that's actually been generated. And then like these people, and then people actually have the gall to say, why do we have so many haters? Yes, there were some haters before, but the haters like exasperated, or actually not exasperated. The haters rose in number greatly as more of these predictions failed because you sucked a bunch of people in at like $1 or 60 cents. You basically made it seem like that it was an infallible theory that it was going to go to hundreds of dollars in a couple of months, and then it actually dropped by 50, 60% over those corresponding months, and then people saw that you were shilling them bullcrap. So obviously you're going to actually generate a lot of haters. That's kind of common sense. If you overpromise something, it doesn't deliver, and you make them actually lose money instead of the massive gains you were promising. Like someone shows a graph like this, and then there's like 1,000 people reinforcing the idea that this has to be right, which is exactly what happens back then and still happens back now, right now. By the way, they use the same poor logic that they actually used back then. They're still connecting, they're still wishing on fairy unicorns and connecting the same imaginary dots. This is actually a really good investment if you're willing to hold on for 5 to 10 years. At least I believe it is. I think it has a decent chance of success, and even if it's not as successful as all it's projected, I still think it can actually reach $3 or $4, which is still 10 times what it is right now. Now, if my projections are correct and it reaches $30, that is 100 times what it's worth right now. And some people are always saying, "Oh, that's like a safe estimate," or "That's like nothing, like that's gains. You might as well just invest in a bank." Okay, a bank is not going to give you 100x or anything close to it. A bank is not going to give you 100x or anything close to it over 10 years. Right now, you'd be lucky if you weren't paying the bank to hold your money because we're getting into negative interest rates in certain parts of the world. And hopefully it doesn't come to the United States, but it actually might come to the United States. So a bank's not going to give you anywhere near it. Most of the time, the stock market's not going to give you anywhere near it. And if you really think that $30 from 30 cents is conservative, you've never really invested at all, because it's definitely not conservative for any kind of asset. Right now, if you're getting in, remember this thing went from half a cent. Well, it was 5 cents in 2013, then went down to half a cent, went to $3, and now it's back down to like 25 cents. The thing is, like with that kind of rise and the last bull cycle, a lot of people, a lot of people actually got noticed of XRP and cryptocurrencies in general. It's made these banking partnerships, and it's one of the best well-known cryptocurrencies. If you get in now, you're no longer in this like innovator stage, and you weren't back in 2018 either. If you wanted to be in this innovator stage, you had to get in way before. You had to get in before early 2017. By early 2018, you were already in this early adopter stage. Obviously, it's not like $10 to $100, but according to this curve, you were already in this early adopter stage. And this statement, even though these price predictions are hilariously wrong and they'll probably never be right, this statement is actually somewhat true. It's not, you're still going to get really good profits, but it's not like you're getting into Amazon at the ground level anymore. You're getting into Amazon at the first floor. So you'll still get pretty good gains, but you're not going to get 1,000x or 2,000x at this point. If you want 1,000x or 2,000x, you're going to have to try to get some cryptocurrency that's relatively not known, has some partnerships that not many people know about it, with a much lower market cap than XRP. Something like if you get into like QNT or Fat Tom right now, and if those things become successful. Now that's a big if, because they could totally fail. But if those things become really successful, you might be able to get 1 or 2,000x gains on something like that. Something like Kyber Network if it becomes really, really big. But with those great gains comes massive risk. With XRP, the risk is actually a lot less, but then the gains aren't going to be quite that type of ROI either. I mean, 100x is still really, really incredible. And if you got into Amazon on the first floor and the ground floor, those are the type of gains that you would actually see. Same thing with Google and all those other companies. Remember, in the tech boom, for every Amazon and Google, there were like 1,000, 2,000 failures, and a lot of those failures, I remember back in the day, were touted as the next big thing, and people thought they were for sure investments, and obviously they weren't. So the risk reward factor actually comes up. Now let's talk about insiders. People in the XRP community love to talk about insiders. Everything tries to come from an insider, and most of those insiders are total bullcrap because they're like all the bears, riddlers, and stuff. They claim to be insiders, but they never verify themselves. We have no idea who they are. For all we know, it could be just some of these YouTubers dressed up in like a suit with question marks or in a bear costume. I mean, who knows, right? Because on the internet, you can say you're anyone, and you can actually say you have X amount of credentials. You can say like you used to be a financial advisor. You can say that you used to work at a large bank. You can actually say whether if you're on Twitter or YouTube, you can say you used to work at a large bank, used to be a financial advisor, you used to work at some like large firm, or you used to work at a central bank. There's no way anyone can actually verify any of this stuff. People can say anything. People can actually say anything to make themselves look credible. And guess what? People lie just to do that, just to make themselves look more credible. Because the thing is, like, say Shane Ellis theory. Who the hell is Shane Ellis? Like, it was basically some guy that someone said, like, oh, yeah, he has some inside information. But we have never gotten any confirmation who Shane Ellis is. Same thing with Bearable Guy. It's a cartoon bear that someone thought was actually an insider or something. Obviously, and people actually believed him with his some people actually were naive enough to believe him with his manifesto once the 589 prediction failed, that it wasn't actually 589, it actually was referring to COMEX rule 589. But how naive do you honestly have to be? Because he actually wrote that manifesto like the day after it failed, obviously trying to justify his incorrect prediction. But the original prediction in the graphic was $589 end of the year. And we all know kind of what that means. I mean, Cobb even said, I don't know if it's true or not, but Cobb even said Bearable Guy told him it was a prediction, and that's when Cobb actually stopped believing in Bearable Guy. Kudos to him, but he's getting really hypey again. So here's the thing, like, people tend to believe these most likely fake insiders and YouTube, Twitter personalities. I mean, I've never really claimed to have like any kind of inside information or some great degree or whatever, or like have I claimed to be like worked at a major central bank before, because I can claim all that stuff and you wouldn't know whether it's true or not. I mean, these things like Shane Ellis theory, even Bob Way has come on and said, and Bob Way is actually a confirmed person that used to work at Ripple, Bob Way has come on and said that Shane Ellis theory is based on a horrible misunderstanding of how markets really work. And Bob Way's patent is actually a patent that incentivizes the doling out of XRP in a way that it would slowly bring prices up. Not like Shane Ellis theory, like, 589 or something in one night. And we know that a lot of those initial assumptions of Shane Ellis theory are extremely flawed. Like, for instance, the assumption that people wouldn't sell into, people wouldn't actually sell into a major gain when they see a big spike, and they would actually wait for the other exchanges to actually catch up. We know that is not true. We absolutely know that it's not true. We've seen Bitcoin do it once on Binance. Like when Bitcoin was at $6,000-$7,000, all of a sudden over the course of a few minutes, it popped up to $10,000 or $11,000, in a few minutes, and it got sold immediately back down. Same thing, XRP popped up to 70 cents at some exchange, and what happened was it got immediately sold back down. So the answer to who would actually sell into buy orders if it pops up very quickly, the answer to that is actually everyone. And like people have tried to tell me, oh, there's going to be a $600 million buy wall. First of all, those buy and sell walls are mostly fake. When the price actually gets close to that amount, usually what happens is those buy walls disappear and they just appear higher or lower. Those are a lot of those are just fake buy walls to try to either suppress the price or buoy the price. We've seen it many, many times. And plus, if you really went to $500, a $600 million buy wall isn't really going to do crap, because that's barely a million coins. Like Jed McCaleb could basically sell through that himself, and there's more whales than him. plus all the swing traders, which will immediately take advantage of that. The high-speed trading bots would melt through a $600 million buy wall if XRP was at $500 in like 5 seconds. So that wall isn't really going to last. And the idea that banks are going to risk billions, maybe even trillions of dollars to hold up that price of XRP is absolutely laughable. There is not one single bank in the world that actually would do that. So you're basically looking at a theory at a theory with extremely flawed assumptions written by someone who we don't even know who he is, who you think has some kind of credibility. All because this is a theory that has XRP going up to astronomical numbers to make people rich. See, the thing about the logic of fanboys of any coin is like their logic is like this. They already start with the assumption that they're going to be rich, and then they basically just try to fill in the gaps of, oh, this has to happen because the end result has to be this, because the world somehow owes me that I am rich because people got rich in 2017, so now it's my turn. There is no turn in real life of you getting rich, all right? The world doesn't really owe you anything. It's basically, do you have the insight to actually invest in something before everyone else knows about it? And a lot of people already know about XRP. So if you're just getting it now, the answer is actually no. Or if you're getting into like XRP, Bitcoin, Ethereum, I should say, or any other coin, the answer is actually no at this point. You didn't have the insight to get into it in 2013 or 2014, which is where you would have had to get into it if you wanted those kind of gains. And you know what the most incredible thing about all this is? When you have a real verified insider, just because she had a price that that wasn't sky high, that was still extremely high, you kind of ignore her and ignore her prediction because it's not high enough for you. What kind of convoluted logic is that? I'm talking about Susan Athey, not the Susie on YouTube, but Susan Athey, who is a member of the board of directors on Ripple and also a Stanford economics professor. So she's worked in the industry. She has a very deep grounded knowledge of economics, being a Stanford professor, and she has insider information because she's on the board of directors. You don't really get much higher in position than the board of directors on a company. Those are the people that determine which CEOs, CTOs to hire and fire. That's what the board of directors does. They steer the company's direction. So she has all three of those qualifications. And you know what's most important? She's actually a verified person. She's not someone that just made up a bunch of bullcrap about who she is, basically. And you can actually verify all this information. For all of the other insiders, most of them just disappear after a while, right? And people somehow still believe in them time after time and time. Oh, let's just have this random YouTube account claim that he's an insider, and everyone believes in him and his $50 or $100 prediction, and then he just disappears after a couple of weeks. He's totally legit, but no, this verified Stanford professor who's on the board of directors, she doesn't know what she's talking about at all. Like, what kind of logic makes you really think of that? Actually, that's why I place so much more credibility on her academic paper than 100 times or 1,000 times more credibility on her academic paper, and I pay attention to it 100 or 1,000 times more than any of these bare moon predictions and any of these YouTube predictions, because half these guys, I have a feeling, have no idea what they're talking about when they actually make these like $10,000 predictions. And that was started by some random dude named Mark Phillips, which no one has heard of before then. And then everyone, because he said XRP was going to be $10,000, and he gave some random dot logic or whatever, people actually believed in him. Whereas they didn't really give nearly as much time to this well written out academic paper with actual reasoning to why she believes that XRP can achieve these values. It's a lot more scientific, has a lot more logic reasoning, and is basically a lot better in pretty much every way than any of these predictions. And many of these predictions that are basically based on nothing have already been proven false by time, and yet people still continue to believe in them. And yet, when we talk about her paper, a lot of times people want to use her formula but completely ignore her numbers. They say oh, she's on the board of directors, her projection is going to be extremely conservative. But it's really not that conservative if you compare it to reality. Here we are almost 2 years later, and we're at 25 cents, not $10. Plus, think about it. She's a Stanford professor. So she's in a tight academic circle. Academic credibility is reliant on a lot of times reliant on accuracy of predictions and stuff. And academic credibility is extremely important to Stanford professors. So she's not going to want to overshoot or undershoot predictions. She's going to want to try to become as accurate as possible. So her paper, the numbers she puts in her paper are most likely going to be what she honestly thinks. And guys, 100x gains over the next 10 years is not small by any means. It's reasonable. It's just not insane. And if you actually took the time to read some of her paper, I know it's extremely hard to understand the full length of it because the different variables, the different math that she uses is quite complex, and most people cannot understand all of that. I mean, I've seen from some of the XRP videos, that half the people can't even do basic math because somehow one of the guys convinced people that just because you can divide XRP up into 8 decimals instead of 6 decimals, that somehow ends up making XRP worth more. That's like saying if I cut an apple into 4 pieces, those 4 pieces somehow equate to more apple than the original apple. That makes no sense at all. Yet, I think half the people that watched that video actually believed it, even though it made 0 sense. So, if you actually look at the reasoning and logic of her paper, the reasoning and logic is actually very solid and found. What she actually explained is that to get to her price and formula, which is very complex, she actually explained that price requires XRP to get about 80% of remittance payments. And that is actually pretty accurate because you think about remittance payments, those are the things that XRP actually shines at. When you're talking about remittance, you're talking about like USD, MXN, USD, PHI, and those kind of corridors, and especially a lot of the smaller corridors in Southeastern Asia. What do those corridors have in common? They're not very liquid. They don't have much liquidity. Therefore, XRP would be excellent as a bridge asset. XRP as a bridge asset for major liquidity corridors like US Euro honestly isn't that helpful because US Euro already has enough liquidity to where you can just directly swap for the two, and there's very little fees in between. There's enough market makers and there's enough liquidity. When you add a bridge asset, you are adding an extra step because you have to first buy the bridge asset and then sell the bridge asset, whereas if you go straight USD Euro, you're just converting one to the other. So it just adds an extra step in. But in corridors with not a lot of liquidity, that bridge is necessary. In corridors with a lot of liquidity, that bridge honestly is not necessary because you can just swap one for the other. There's always market makers available. The spread is extremely low or almost non-existent. It's like 1 basis point, which by the way is basically $1 in 10,000 in terms of cost. So that kind of liquidity is going to be like less than your market maker and exchange fees. So technically, there's really no savings to actually. There's very little to no savings actually being made in the high liquidity corridors. But most remittances, and especially the growth in remittances, which she actually projected, is going to be in those illiquid corridors, and that's why she projects XRP to have about 80% dominance by 2030. Remember, her $32 projection is by 2030. All the projections in that paper that we actually talk about are generally by 2030 in 10 years. So she thinks in 10 years that XRP will dominate roughly 80% of remittance payments, and I actually agree with that logic because it makes a lot of sense. However, she also says XRP will dominate 40% of business payments. And I agree with that as well, because business payments, a lot of them are going to transact between the major corridors, and you're not going to have nearly as much success dominating those because there's so much liquidity between the major corridors that a lot of the times they're not going to require a bridge asset. But more than that, like large business payments, I don't think they'll go across public ledgers. They're going to go into permission private ledgers because big businesses don't really want people to see like what they're spending or what they're spending these large chunks of money on. They'll be in private permission ledgers, and they don't really need to use a bridge asset because those things are pretty much worked out in advance, and it's basically just a straight swap. Some of them are going to be stock swaps as well. So essentially, 40% for those kind of transactions, I actually think is kind of on the high side, even for 2030. But I'll agree with it because I think for a lot of business transfers, XRP will make sense to use. So that's why the 40% comes into play, because it's not going to be 100% of all big business transfers, because a lot of those are going to be permissioned, a lot of those are going to be secret, and a lot of them are going to transact just secretly, but maybe not on blockchain. Maybe like IBM will have a private blockchain, not worldwide, but like a private blockchain where that actually takes place because they don't want the public to really see it. And then she says only 3% of FX. Now, the majority of FX is going to be via like the major corridors like USD JPY or USD Euro. That, I mean, CLS already has a system to do that, and it's been on for almost a year, and it's not using any digital currencies. And I don't think they're really going to change that system anytime soon. And at least they have no plans to. Same thing with like stuff like the DTCC. First of all, the DTCC is mostly domestic for right now. And someone at XRP Chat actually emailed one of the directors at the DTCC asking them if they're working with digital assets, and they flatly said no. So that stuff I don't think is going to involve really any kind of like digital assets. But the DTCC aside, the FX market, I think like 95% of it is going to be in the more liquid corridors where you can just basically settle directly. So there's a reason why she doesn't think that XRP is really going to affect the FX markets all that much, like pure FX speculation trading. She doesn't think it's going to actually affect it that much. And if you actually read it, she has really good reasoning. So I agree with a lot of her assumptions. 80% of the remittance market, because you're never going to take 100% of everything. 40% of the business market, only 3 or 4% of the FX market. And that's where she comes up with the price of $32 in 10 years. Now, taking 40% of the business market and 80% of the remittance market is going to take a long time. It's not going to happen overnight. You see Garlinghouse say like $1 billion by the end of 2020. We don't even know if that's $1 billion. I don't think it's $1 billion total. It might be $1 billion per day. And that's probably like 40, 50%. And then you basically take over the other 40, 50% over the next X amount of years. And business payments and everything are going to take much, much longer than that. And FX markets, we're really not even talking about that until at least 2022, 2023. So I think it's going to take about 10 years for her projection to come through. So after you think about all the logic, her reasoning is far superior to Bearable Guy's reasoning or any of these XRP YouTubers' reasoning, but people don't really want to actually pay attention to it, despite that it's a lot superior to any of the reasonings that any of the other predictions give, and despite the fact that she is an actual insider with a deep understanding of economics. And we know that, and she's more importantly, she's a verified insider. She's not some fake insider that just appeared out of nowhere, which I'm guessing most of these other insiders are. We know she's at the top level of Ripple. We know that she has deep understanding of economics. We know that she knows Ripple's what's going on internally, and we know that she has a good scope of the market. Being on the board of directors, she's going to have privy into the information for a lot of these secret meetings that people like to talk of, if they even exist. So she has the insider information to be making these type of projections, and much more educated and better projections than any of us on YouTube or any of us on Twitter. So that's why I tend to follow her projection a lot better, because I believe it's going to be a lot more accurate, and there's a lot more credibility into her prediction and her formula than anyone else's prediction and anyone else's formula. And also, like, it's been 2 years since these theories started circulating about like world reserve currency, this or that. But the thing is, if any of that was true, XRP's price would be a lot higher than 25 cents right now. The fact that it's 25 cents right now tells me that stuff honestly isn't true. And people talk about price suppression and all this stuff, but really you wouldn't be able to suppress it if any of that stuff was actually true. Think about it. You have people at the IMF, the World Bank, or whatever people talk about, the BIS. If they've already decided that XRP was going to be the winner, it was going to be the one was going to be adopted, even if they don't tell the public, the big hedge fund managers, the big bankers, the central bankers, they're all going to know. And you wouldn't be able to keep that secret for more than a few weeks. You would never be able to keep it for like a year or two. And the price would actually reflect it, because even if they don't straight out say it to the public, the demand for XRP would just go up exponentially just from these individual bankers buying it. Now, they may not be able to buy it forthfront for their organizations, but you can bet that they would actually be trying to buy every single XRP they could on the open market for their own private accounts. And even if there's some kind of restriction placed on these bankers that they couldn't buy it, but by the way, that restriction would never work because they would just do it outside anyways. They would just go around and do it anyways because, those kind of restrictions on bankers and big finance businessmen has never worked. So they're not going to start magically working just for XRP. They're going to tell their relatives or their relatives, their families, they're going to go against the agreement if they know that XRP is going to be the new world currency. And those people would actually open accounts and buy every last drop of XRP available on the open market. That hasn't happened for a year and a half. So that basically tells me there's not as much going on behind the scenes as people are projecting. So that's actually my thoughts for XRP. I do believe in Susan Athey's model. I still believe in maybe about 100x gains in 10 years, and that's $30 stable, not $30 on a FOMO. That's about $20 to $30 stable on a FOMO. I'm still fairly bullish on the prospect of XRP overall. It's just that I think the community is really toxic. I mean, I thought Bitcoin maxis were bad, but honestly, XRP maxis just take stupidity to like a whole different level. I mean, they're the only ones that are constantly harassing Western Union on Twitter and stuff like that. So overall, I'm actually very bullish on XRP for the long term. I just think half the community is like insane or nuts, honestly. And they don't pay attention to real insiders and their projections, but pay attention to fake insiders. Kind of like real desperation. So that is my thoughts on XRP. I think it's a good investment for the long term, but I think half the community is just like crazy or insane. So that is my projection. Let me know what you think in the comments. Join me on my daily live streams every weekday from about 11:30 a.m. Central Standard Time and about 9 to 10 p.m. Central Standard Time. Hit that like and subscribe button and hit the notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.